So going back, you mentioned that you were a writer for Macworld. How did you end up in that position?
Um, it was interesting. So I mentioned before I worked in technology. Coming out of college, I had an English degree, and so I always kind of wanted to write, but I also knew it was a difficult career to get into. And so I sort of went back to a job I'd had working in IT and sort of fixing computers, that kind of stuff, because I'd always sort of been a hobby of mine, and I was pretty good at that. And after a few years doing that, I was like, man, I just don't, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. And so I remember being at my job and sort of thinking like, all right, I'm going to make a list of like all the things that I would like to do. And some of them were like totally outlandish. Like, I have no idea how to do this, but like one of them was like, be a writer for The Daily Show. And I was like, that sounds super cool. I don't know how you would do that, but I'm going to put it down the list. And I kind of came up with a few things, and one of them was like a lot of them seem to be like movie and TV related. So I was like, oh, maybe I'll apply to film school and try that and see like if that's something. And I ended up not getting into any of my film schools. But one of the other things I put on there was like I had been reading Macworld magazine since I was a teenager, and I loved just I'd get my issue in the mail and I'd read it cover to cover. And I always enjoyed, especially the back page columns, like on the last page of the magazine, there would always be these just very sort of thoughtful, like what if sort of hypothetical columns, like, oh, let's investigate this one idea. And sometimes they would even be like humorous or whatever. I was like, that's cool. I would love to write one of those someday. And so I emailed. I noticed the editor-in-chief in the magazine at the bottom. He'd say like, "Oh, drop me an email if you have any questions." I was like, "Oh, well, I'll send him an email." And I asked like, "Hey, how do you get started in this business? Like, what would you recommend to somebody who's interested?" And he wrote me back very nicely. He didn't have to, and he took the time. I was like, "Yeah, absolutely. Like, here's a couple places that you might try to like pitch stories to, essentially, if you have ideas." I was like, "This is super cool. Thanks." Like. And I proceeded not to do any of that because I was still kind of lazy. And then I decided to like leave my IT job, not really knowing what I was going to do next. And I traveled for a little bit and was like, I'm just going to sort of figure out what I want to do. And one of the things I did was at that point, there was still this annual conference, the Macworld Expo, where you would go and Apple would have these announcements and there would be all these booths and like sort of like a Comic-Con sort of thing, but for Apple nerds. And I was like, I always wanted to go. It's in San Francisco. I live in Boston. It's like all the way across. But, hey, I'm traveling around. I'm sort of figuring stuff out. I'll go out there and check it out. And while I was there, I happened to see a panel recording about some Apple topics. And one of the people on it was this guy, Jason Snell, who was the editor of Macworld that I had sent the email to. And I was like, oh, well, I should say hi. And so I went up to him. I was like, oh, I emailed you like a year ago about like getting started in this whole business, and thanks for your response and all that. And by the way, do you have any jobs? And he's like, well, no, we're not really hiring right now, but we are starting up this blog and we might be looking for some freelancers. So, shoot me an email and, maybe we can figure something out. And so I ended up doing that. And I submitted some writing samples, and they hired me to start blogging for them. And I'll tell you, in those days, again, it's 2006, I was getting paid. I think when I signed the contract, it was like $5 for a blog post. And I was very lucky when I finished my first sort of pay period, first month or whatever. They're like, you know what? You've been doing a great job. We'll give you $7 a blog post. I was like, woo, $7. So I just sort of like, I'd always been a writer. And so I just would churn through stuff basically as fast as I could do is like produce content. And what ended up happening was I did so much work for them that they started asking me to do some stuff for the magazine. Like, oh, do you want to like write this piece that will actually go to the magazine? I was like, oh, absolutely. Yes, I do want to do this. And I basically said yes to everything. That was sort of my other key. It was like, you're going to offer me an opportunity, I'm going to do it. And so over the next year and a half, I ended up sort of working my way up and becoming the co-editor of the blog because some people left and like I ended up sort of taking over their role. And then about a year and a half in, they're like, look, you've been writing so much stuff for us. It's actually just cheaper for us to hire you. So they hired me on as an associate editor. And I was there for a little over 7 years. And I sort of worked my way up from associate editor to senior editor. And yeah, that was basically a great experience for me. It was like my first sort of real career job. And again, I did end up writing a back page column from them for a few points. And to me, that was like, check that off the bucket list because that's something I wanted to do for like 15 years and I got to do it. So that was an awesome experience and I really loved my time there.